Okay, shalom everybody. We're going to continue with our Sefer HaChinuch, and today we are going to start with the first mitzvah, and that is the mitzvah of be fruitful and multiply. And in Hebrew, that's peru urvu. So by way of introduction, it's very, very important to point out a few things so that we understand how we're going to go about learning and the structure of Sefer HaChinuch as far as technically from the text. First of all, we have to remember that there's a difference between the first mitzvah in the Torah and the first mitzvah that the Jewish people were commanded. Because what we're going to do with Sefer HaChinuch is we're going to start from Parashat Bereshit, and we're going to make our way as far as we possibly can through Sefer Devarim. Right? We haven't been able to complete all the 613 mitzvot in 1 year, but hopefully we'll definitely get as far as we possibly can. So there is the first step, which is the Sefer HaChinuch structure, which is starting from Parashat Bereshit. Are there any mitzvot in that parasha? And then you go to Noah, and then you go to Lech Lecha Vayera, and so on, and you go through every single one of the parashiot. And you see if there are any mitzvot that are found in the Torah in that parasha. If there are mitzvot, then we're going to pull them out and they're going to be spoken about. And if there aren't any mitzvot, then we're going to go until the next parasha that has one. So it just so happens to be, which you're going to see shortly after we start the slides, that Sefer Bereshit Sefer Bereshit has mitzvah of peru urvu, and then we move forward later on. So you'll see you'll see the structure as it goes about. But the most important thing to remember right now, by way of introduction, is there is mitzvah based on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, starting from the beginning of the Sefer HaTorah, and then there is mitzvah 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 based on the commandment. The difference between the two is that the first mitzvah commanded to the Jewish people was the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, and mitzvah Kiddush HaChodesh was HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells the Jewish people 2 weeks before they leave Mitzrayim that they should set the Rosh Chodesh, they should set the moon, follow the moon, and when there's a full moon, determine when Rosh Chodesh will be. And the reason why, as we spoke about this in our Torah pyramid, the reason why it's so important to have Rosh Chodesh or to know when the beginning of the month is, because the religion is based on the calendar, the Jewish calendar, the lunar calendar, coming to say that if we don't know when Rosh Chodesh is, then we don't know when the 15th day of the month is, and therefore we don't know when Pesach is, and so on and so forth. So we need to know when Rosh Chodesh is because our entire religion is based on the calendar. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Bnei Israel before they leave Egypt, the first thing I need you to do is the Chodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodashim. Rishon Hu leChodshei Hashana. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells the Jewish people in Chodesh Nisan, which is, of course, we know when the Jewish people were saved from Egypt and left Egypt, and said, this will be for you Rosh Chodesh. What we know is Rosh Hashanah, not the Rosh Hashanah that we go to Bet HaKnesset and blow shofar, but rather the beginning of the biblical year. And we spoke about that also, the difference between the biblical year and the Gregorian calendar, the biblical calendar. For now, what I want you to remember is that the first commandment that the Jewish people were commanded as a nation was the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. And then once they left Egypt and they kept on moving forward with Matan Torah and so on, so of course there were other commandments that came along the way. So we are now going to learn the first mitzvah that's found in the Torah. That's the first thing that I want you to pay attention to. The second thing I want you to pay attention to is that the structure is the name of the mitzvah number 1, be fruitful and multiply. Then I give you the biblical source of the mitzvah, the literal pasuk that the mitzvah shares, that the Torah shares with us regarding this mitzvah. And then we do what's called mishorshei ha-mitzvah, the root of the mitzvah. And it's very important to focus on the word root because it's not the one and only sole meaning reason behind the mitzvah. It is one of, and in many of the cases, one of many of the reasons why we fulfill this mitzvah, why HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded us of the following mitzvah. So the reason why I think it's so important to understand this is because sometimes I hear in class where someone will say, my teacher told me that this is why we do this. Yeah, that could be 100% true. And as long as there's a source in the Midrash or in the Halacha or in the Gemara or in the Kabbalah or wherever there is a rabbinical Midrash or a biblical Midrash or some type of a source that is based to the Torah, then there's no reason why it shouldn't be Shiv'im Panim La Torah. There are many different facets to the Torah. There are many different ways to look at the Torah, to understand what the Torah is telling us. And there's no reason why we can't fulfill all these different reasons if they meet and match with us. That being said, I'm not going to list all the reasons that the Chachamim give us for any specific mitzvah, but rather we're going to try to keep it to a theme. So we might give one, we might give a few more, but ultimately just please keep in mind that as you grow and as you mature and as you learn more, you're going to hear new things, you're going to hear more things, and keep in mind that it's not a contradiction to anything that you've learned. Okay, so those are the two main things that I want you to remember. And then I want you to focus on trying to find whether this mitzvah, any mitzvah that we're going to learn, is a mitzvah aseh or it's a mitzvah lo ta'aseh, right? Is it a do mitzvah or is it a do not do mitzvah? Who is obligated to do the mitzvah? When is this mitzvah obligated to be done? Because this is going to be part of the theme that we spoke about in yesterday's recording, where we talked about there are 613 mitzvot / 1,000, right? But ultimately, if you think about it on a very big level or big picture, how many mitzvot out of the 613 mitzvot can we actually perform? Right? Can any one Jew perform it? And believe it or not, it's not close to 613. It's actually less than 200 mitzvot. So out of the 613 mitzvot, there are less than 200 mitzvot that we could actually perform. Now, the reason why I say that is because there are some mitzvot that are relevant just to Kohanim. There are some mitzvot that are relevant just to Leviim. Others that are relevant just to Yisrael, like Pidyon HaBen. Right, the Kohen and the Levi don't do Pidyon HaBen, which is they're redeeming the firstborn, and the Kohen Levi don't do that. Israel do. So this is one mitzvah of Pidyon HaBen that has a whole bunch of different details to it that is not relevant to a lot of people. There's other mitzvot that are relevant only on Yom Kippur. There are other mitzvot that are relevant only when the Beit HaMikdash was around. There's other mitzvot that are relevant only to Eretz Yisrael, mitzvot hateluyot ba'aretz. And there are mitzvot that are relevant in the exile, right? So when you look at all the mitzvot that we have, all the commandments that we have, and we talk about being overwhelmed by the number of commandments that we have, how many mitzvot do we actually have? I mean, there aren't really that many close to the 613 that we could say every day I need to focus on 613 mitzvot and everything else that I have to do throughout my day. So keep in mind that even this mitzvah that we're going to learn about now, be fruitful and multiply, which is have children, that's not relevant until a person is married. So prior to them being married, this mitzvah is not relevant to them. Once they fulfill the mitzvah, I'm going to talk about how that could be done, then that mitzvah now is not relevant as active as it was prior to them fulfilling the mitzvah, because they fulfill the mitzvah. So you see that there's a lot of time mitzvot, a lot of mitzvot that are based on season and holiday and person, place, or thing. So that being said, it's important to note this, because when a mitzvah does come our way and we do have an opportunity to fulfill a mitzvah and we have the obligation to fulfill mitzvah, we should really jump on it, because there's a lot of value to the mitzvah that we fulfill. Okay, so let's begin. Mitzvah number 1, which is the first mitzvah found in the Torah, is the mitzvah of be fruitful and multiply, also known as mitzvat pirya verivya. Pirya, from the root word of pri, which means fruits, be fruitful. Verivya is to multiply. Okay, and it says in Sefer Bereshit yesh ba mitzvat aseh achat. There is only one mitzvat aseh in Sefer Bereshit, or Parashat Bereshit, vehi mitzvat pirya verivya, and it is the mitzvah of be fruitful and multiply. Shneimar, as it says in the pasuk, vayivarech otam Elohim, and Hashem blessed them. Vayomer lahem Elohim peru urvu, and Hashem told them, peru urvu, be fruitful and multiply. Now, who did Hashem command this mitzvah to? Of course, I think we all know this is referring to Adam and Chava. So right away when Hashem creates the world, and on the 6th day, when Hashem creates Adam and Chava, leading into Shabbat, Hashem commands them right away, peru urvu. Vayivarech otam Elohim, vayomer lahem Elohim, peru urvu. Hashem has blessed them. And Hashem told them, I want you to be fruitful and multiply. So this commandment is to Adam and Chava. As we know, is this a mitzvot aseh or a mitzvot lo ta'aseh? So of course, we could clearly understand that this is a mitzvot aseh, a do, go and do. Why? Vayivarech otam Elohim, vayomer lahem peru urvu. Go and be fruitful, not refrain from, but rather go and be fruitful and multiply. Okay? So this is a mitzvah aseh, commanded to Adam Rishon, all the beginning. And I read the English, the commandment of procreation, and Parashat Bereshit has one positive mitzvah, and that is to the commandment of procreation, as it is stated in Genesis 1:28, also known as Sefer Bereshit. And God blessed them and told them to procreate. This is a very important point I want to point out here. FYI, I didn't write this English translation. I would have used a few different words. And the reason why I kept it actually is because I wanted to give you guys this lesson. And the lesson is that although we're very, very fortunate and we're very, very lucky that we have a lot of different organizations that came about, and a lot of people that came about, Rabbanim that came about, and many others that came about to translate the Torah, we have to be very, 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 very careful not to live by the translation. Okay, and I'm not coming to say that there's a mistake here, but I'm going to point something out that will prove my point, and that's one of the reasons why I chose to leave this translation as opposed to translating it myself. It is very important that when we learn from the Torah, that we use the Torah's words and not the words that were translated for us. Again, it's a luxury that we have. We're very fortunate. And unfortunately, nowadays, there are many, or maybe too many people that are not fluent in Hebrew. And therefore, when they read the Torah and they read the biblical Hebrew, they don't connect with what it's saying. They could understand maybe Vayomer or maybe Lahem, and that's because they took Lashon or Dikduk, and that's what they were taught in school. But they don't really understand all the different words, their roots, and all the different the different rules to understanding the Hebrew language. And therefore, when we translate something, there are a lot of things that could and do get lost in translation. And I would never want, which has happened many times, a student comes and says, Rabbi, look, but it says over here that this is what it means. So hold on a second. Where does it say that? In the English? Hashem didn't write the English. The English was written by someone. And again, that's not to come to say that it's wrong, but you're right. Based on translation, that is what it says. That's what it translates to. But who says that's what the meaning is, or that's what we're supposed to learn from there? Okay, I could give you some examples. I'm going to give you just one. I'll use this one over here, but I'll give you just another one. When we go to Parashat Shemini, and the Torah talks about the animals that we're allowed to eat versus the animals that we're not allowed to eat, there's translations of animals which today we call it one creature, and in the olden days or biblical times it was called another creature. It was a different type of creature. For example, the alnevet, I believe it's the alnevet. I can look it up. I have a book that talks about it, where you have an animal that we know today as a hare or a rabbit, when really it was much closer to the pig or some type of other species. Again, I could look it up. Don't quote me on it. I could look it up and tell you guys exactly what I'm referring to. I actually have the book over here, but I don't want to take the time now to study it or to search for it, better yet. But the point that I'm trying to make is that because we translate something as one way, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what the Torah was referring to or what the Torah meant. So please do not live by the translation and use that as your manuscript. Use the Hebrew for your manuscript. Try to find someone that can help you translate it, that has a little bit more knowledge in Torah, that could understand not just a literal translation, but really what it transliterates into, which is the meaning that Hashem, the purpose and meaning that Hashem had. So when we look at this pasuk here, and it says, and God blessed them and told them to procreate, well, let's see what the pasuk says. The pasuk says, Vayivarech otam Elohim, vayomer lahem Elohim peru urvu. Right? Vayivarech otam Elohim, God blessed them. That's fair, and God blessed them. That matches. Vayomer lahem Elohim, and God told them. It doesn't say that here in the English. In the English, it says, and told them. But the Torah pointed out Elohim. Vayomer lahem Elohim. Hashem told them, God told them. We can't translate something and remove words that are not there, that are there because we feel that, oh, you know who I'm talking about. Again, I'm not here to criticize the translation that we have before us. I'm here just to point out something. Okay. And the next point is, Vayomer lahem Elohim peru urvu. And God told them, procreate. Actually, it does not say procreate. It says peru or vu, be fruitful and multiply. Now, does be fruitful and multiply mean procreate? Yeah, it does. Because at the end of the day, we're not trees. And because we're not trees, we can't say bring fruits. However, if you go to Sefer Devarim and you study Sefer Devarim, you'll see that in Sefer Devarim, man is considered a tree. Ki ha'adam etz hasadeh. So if man is considered a tree, maybe there is something here that there is a connection between Sefer Devarim and Sefer Bereshit. And when the Torah says in Sefer Bereshit, Peru urvu, there's some type of lesson that could be derived because of the fact that in Sefer Devarim, man is considered etz hasadeh, the tree of the field. Okay, so now we're limiting ourselves from the deep knowledge of the Torah. We're limiting ourselves from the information that Hashem wanted to share with us and is putting right in front of us because we lightly translated something. So again, the lesson that I want to take out from this entire little spiel that I'm giving you here is study the Hebrew, learn the Hebrew, understand the Hebrew. We have Rashi, we have Ramban, we have Or HaHayim, we have many different commentaries that we could go to that that will teach us all that we need to do. Yeah, you could. We have many different commentaries that we could use, that we could go to, that will teach us all that we need to understand about the psukim versus just focusing on what the English says. And again, I please ask, do not take this in a negative way. I'm not trying to criticize. I personally use ArtScroll is not one of my favorites. It's by far my favorite source for translation, whether be it the Stone Edition or on the Tanakh, or whether be it on the Chumash, or whether be it on Rashi. Simply amazing work. There's nothing more to talk about. What they have done for Am Yisrael is just unbelievable. And just by the way, a really cool Snapple fun fact. Do you know who is the largest acquirer of the Stone Edition, what we know as the Blue Chumash, the Hebrew-English Blue ArtScroll Chumash? Very good. The Vatican, that's correct. The Vatican is the #1 acquirer of the Stone Edition Hebrew-English ArtScroll Chumash. Just to show you how great they really are, that it's not even, of course, we as Jews buy a tremendous amount. I could say that almost every single shul has, I know in my shul, that's the #1 go-to that we use. But ultimately, you see that they definitely did a great job if it made it all the way to the Vatican, not to make the Vatican any greater than any shul, but at the same time, you see that it's used by others as well. Okay, so just to put that aside, but it's an important lesson that I didn't want to skip over. So mitzvah #1 is be fruitful and multiply. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Vayivarech otam Elohim, and God blessed Adam and Chava. Vayomer lahem Elohim peru urvu, and God told them peru urvu. Now, just something to point out over here. There's a lot of talk of whether or not were there other people in the world at the time of Adam Rishon, and there's a great Jewish scientist. His name is Gerald Schroeder, who has a book on this that you could study. You could find it online. You could read it. Who talks about the fact that there were other people that were created by Hashem after Adam was created, Adam / Chava, and therefore when the Torah says Vayivarech otam Elohim, it is not necessarily speaking only to Adam and Chava, because then the pasuk would have said Vayivarech et Adam, or Vayivarech Elohim et Adam ve'Chava, Vayomer le'Adam u'le'Chava, or Vayomer Elohim le'Adam u'le'Chava, right? He would have specified Adam, like for example, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe. Right? Whenever we see that Hashem is speaking to Moshe specifically, then we know that there is a connection between the speech and who Hashem is speaking to. When the pasuk says Vayivarech otam Elohim, them, plural, who is he referring to? And we go with the lesson that there were other people that were created at the time as well. Adam, of course, was Adam Harishon first, and that's what makes him first, is when there's a second, because you can't be first unless there is a second, and he wouldn't be called Adam Harishon, but rather he would be called Adam Echad. Okay, so that's of course a conversation that we can expound on. But the point that I'm trying to make is that here you see, just from Vayivarech otam, that one word otam, we could have an entire lesson that teaches us whether or not there were more people created in the age of the world, and so many other details that I could teach you. Here we see in the English, and God bless them. Yeah, God bless them. Imagine if this translator would have written, and God blessed Adam and Chava. So now again, it would have been a limitation to the lesson that we could learn from the Torah. All right, so the first mitzvah is peru urvu, be fruitful and multiply. You want to call it procreate, you could do that, but we're going to call it be fruitful and multiply. And this is a mitzvah aseh, as it says, vayomer lehem peru urvu, go and be fruitful and multiply. Awesome. What is mishorshei ha-mitzvah, the root of the mitzvah? What is the reason for this mitzvah? And there are others that we're going to point out as well, but this is just one. Mishorshei ha-mitzvah zu, kedei sheyihyeh ha'olam meyushav, in order that the world wouldn't be inhabited. Can you imagine that the reason why Hashem commanded Adam, Chava, the people of his time, to have children, to be fruitful and multiply, is in order to inhabit the world? Now, why does Hashem want to inhabit the world is obviously going to be our question. And the answer to that is because if there are people, then there are those that could serve Hashem. Now, I know that the first thing that's jumping into your mind is, really? It's all about God? God is so egotistical and self-centered that he creates an entire people and an entire creation just so people could serve him? Really? Is that really what it's all about? Survey says, no, that's not what it's all about. It's on the contrary. Hashem doesn't need us to do anything for Hashem. There is nothing that we could do that benefits Hashem. There is nothing that we could do that takes away from Hashem. And on that note, just to focus on the fact that when we say that, oh, you did a mitzvah and you made Hashem so happy, obviously, it might not be obvious, but I hope we could understand that being that Hashem is perfect, then we can't add to Hashem's happiness because Hashem is perfectly happy, right? And when we talk about making an avera, person transgresses and performs a sin, then they made Hashem angry. Even though the Torah says, hara api bahim, Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, I'm upset at them, and all these different types of words of anger and happiness and fear and love. These are words that are there kedei lesaber et ha'ozen, in order for us to be able to understand the Torah better, and not, of course, to be taken literally, because by God, or in God's terms or world, God being perfect, it's impossible to add or take away. So that being said, when it talks about the world being inhabited with the mitzvah of peru urvu, then the reason for that would be, and here's the avalanche, Hashem creates the world. Hashem creates the world in order to create man. Hashem creates the world in order to create man to give to man, in order to create man to give to man, in order to be able to give good to man. So ultimately, the reason why Hashem created the world is so that Hashem could give us good. Not so that we could look up towards God and say, I'm here to serve you, I'm here to serve you. God doesn't need us to serve him, but rather the reason why Hashem created the world is so that he could give us good. Okay, so you buy a candy to give to your son, to your daughter, to your friend, to your sibling, to your parent. You buy it not to hold on to it, not so that they should, now that you gave it to them, look up to you and say, oh, thank you so much for the candy. That's not why you're giving them the candy. You're giving them the candy so they could benefit from its sweetness. They could enjoy what the candy offers. Hashem created the entire world so that we could benefit from rak lehit'aneg al Hashem, just to have pure enjoyment from Hashem. So mishorshei ha-mitzvah azu, the root of this world, of this mitzvah, is kedei sheyihyeh ha'olam miyushav, in order that the world will be inhabited, so that we ultimately avalanche to get and receive from Hashem. All right, beautiful. Who is commanded to fulfill this mitzvah? Obviously, we're going to talk about man and woman, but versus animal, yes. But is it man? Is it woman? Who's commanded? So according to the Sefer HaChinuch, the answer is the man. Although, of course, the woman receives reward as well, which means that the commandment, the obligation, is towards the man. And we find this in a very simple way, where ha'ish mekadeshet ha'isha, we learn from the Torah that the man sanctifies the woman. The man's responsibilities are ultimately towards the woman and not vice versa. Hence the reason why we sign a ketubah, and the man is the one who signs the ketubah. I don't mind the background music. That's my dog, as you all know. You've heard her before. Must be the mailman or someone here. Ha'ish mekadeshet ha'isha, the man sanctifies the woman. He's responsible for the woman. He's the one who provides for the woman. And part of how he has to provide for her is intimately as well. This is all the man's responsibility. So man is commanded to fulfill this mitzvah, and therefore he should search for a wife, and therefore he should go and get married, as it says in the Torah by Adam Rishon. Which means that now, because of this, man is commanded to leave his mother and father, and he should glue himself to his wife, which means that now he commits to one woman, to his wife, and they should be one. Just check to see if there might be someone outside that's barking at. Okay, and they should be one, and that is the commandment that Adam has towards Chava, or towards this mitzvah of be fruitful and multiply. This is really cool, in my opinion, and I believe that we're going to end with this, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so the next point is, there are 4 different options to fulfill this mitzvah. How do you fulfill this mitzvah? And of course, I don't mean technically, but rather based on the amount of children or type of children that we have, gender of child, how do we fulfill this mitzvah? And there are 4 opinions, very interestingly, right? So meaning to say, how many children does a person have to have, and what gender must they be in order for a person to fulfill the mitzvah of Peru Urvu? That is the golden question. And the answer is, opinion number 1 says 1 boy and 1 girl. So according to one opinion, if a person has 1 boy and 1 girl, they fulfill the mitzvah of Peru Urvu. Where does this derive from? In the pasuk that says Peru, which is multiple, and Urvu, which is multiple, then the minimum of multiple is 2, as we know, with a minimum of plural is 2, and therefore if one has more than 1, which is 2, whether it be 1 boy and 1 girl, then they fulfill this mitzvah. The second opinion is that you have to have 2 boys. If you have more than that, that's great, but in order to fulfill this mitzvah, one would have to have at least 2 boys. The third opinion is to have at least 2 girls. And the fourth and final opinion is to have at least 2 boys and 2 girls. So it would be 4 children in total, 2 boys, 2 girls at least. And then anything that you have more than that is great. So the question here now is, if a person has only 1 child, do they fulfill this mitzvah of Peru Urvu? Right? A very good question. In addition to that, we have another question that comes up, and that is, what about an adopted child or a foster child? These type of children, meaning to say, is that considered somebody who fulfilled the mitzvah as well? So just to point, I'll get to that in a second. I just want to point out the last point here, which is one who negates it violates a positive commandment. One who does not have children, who chooses not to have children, not of course one who cannot, but who chooses not to, then they are violating a positive mitzvah. They are mevatel mitzvat aseh. The commandment is go peru urvu, and they're saying, no, I don't want to peru urvu, and therefore they are negating a mitzvah, as is shown is that he doesn't want to fulfill God's will to settle this world, right? Which means that Hashem says, I want you to fill this world with families, with people, with inhabitants. And you're saying, no, I don't want to. I'm going against the master plan. All right. So now, does that mean that it's a sin if somebody doesn't have children? The answer is no. There's no direct sin for not having children. In addition to that, if someone has 1 child, which is not one of the 4 options here of fulfilling the mitzvah, does that mean that they didn't fulfill the mitzvah? No, that is also not to be said. Also, we need to know the circumstances. There are a lot of other details here that have to be applied before we could just jump to a conclusion of hit or miss, pass or fail. Right? You have someone who might have some emotional challenges that they can't have another child, medical reasons one cannot have a child. There's a lot of things to talk about, but underliningly, it's important to note that one of the main reasons why we get married is in order to be able to build a family, which is to fulfill this mitzvah of inhabiting the world. Now, what about adoption? The answer is that a person who adopts a child is doing a very big mitzvah. And I think that it would be more of a mitzvah of chesed than be fruitful and multiply, but they cannot say that they fulfill the mitzvah of be fruitful and multiply because of the fact that it's not their actual child. They did not bring this child to this world. They're raising this child, which is a very big mitzvah, but they're not bringing this child to this world. But it is very important to note, and we have a biblical source for this, which is very, very cool to point out, that a lot of people don't understand the connection between adoption and Torah. Where's that connection, right? Why do we adopt, or where does this come from a biblical perspective? So it is brought down that a person who cannot have children, then a segula to have children is to adopt a child. That means that if a person struggles with having children and they adopt, then their chances now of naturally having a child are much greater. And where do we see this from? None other than Avraham and Sarah. Avraham Avinu has Yishmael. with Hagar, and Sarah is barren. She's unable to have children. And then the Torah tells us that Sarah brings Yishmael al birka, on her knees, which means she adopts Ishmael, ultimately adopts Ishmael. And the next thing we find out is that Sarah is pregnant with Yitzchak. So we see from here it is derived that one who cannot have children, who's having infertility issues or struggling with children, then adopting is definitely a segula to have children. I want to share with you a true story and end with this for today, as our time is coming to an end for today's class, that there's a family that we know of, that I know of, my family knows of, that we had bumped into, who had fostered a child, ended up adopting them because they couldn't have children, ended up adopting 2 more children after fostering them as well. So now there are 3, and then they had 5 of their own children to follow. So it became a beautiful family of 8, 3 adopted and 5 of their own. And again, I guess you could say that it's based on the fact that it works, as the Torah tells us. So we're going to end over here with the mitzvah of be fruitful and multiply. And tomorrow, Be'ezat Hashem, or in our next segment, we're going to continue with the mitzvah number 2. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening, and have a wonderful, great day.